Hey guys, welcome to RedSunStories. Hope you're doing well. Tonight we're exploring the story of Princess Kaguya, a Japanese folklore story that's shaped pop culture for ages. Countless animes and video games have drawn inspiration from it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I'd love to know who's watching from around the world. Now, dim the lights, and let's dive into tonight's story together. In the rolling hills of ancient Japan, where morning mist clung to the valleys like silk veils, there lived an old bamboo cutter named Takatori no Okina. The mountain slopes around his simple home were covered in endless groves of bamboo that swayed like green waves in the gentle breeze, their hollow stems singing soft melodies when the wind passed through them. Each morning, as the first golden rays of sunlight filtered through the forest canopy, Okina would make his way along the winding paths that led deeper into the bamboo wilderness. His weathered hands gripped his cutting blade with the certainty that comes from decades of honest work, and his steps followed trails worn smooth by the passage of countless seasons. On this particular morning, something extraordinary awaited him in the depths of the grove. As he walked along a path bordered by stones covered in moss and morning dew, a strange and beautiful light caught his eye. There, standing among its ordinary companions, was a single stalk of bamboo that seemed to contain the very essence of moonlight within its hollow form. The bamboo glowed with an ethereal radiance that seemed to pulse gently like a heartbeat, casting dancing shadows on the forest floor around it. Its surface was smooth as polished jade, and its color was unlike any green Okina had ever seen, as if it contained all the emerald shades of every spring that had ever blessed the mountains. Drawn by wonder and barely daring to breathe, the old bamboo cutter approached this miraculous sight. The light grew stronger as he drew near, warm and welcoming rather than harsh or blinding. With reverent care, he made a single clean cut near the base of the glowing stalk. As the bamboo parted, the light intensified for a moment, and there within the hollow interior, no larger than his thumb, sat a perfect infant girl. She was so small she could rest in the palm of his weathered hand, yet she was complete and beautiful in every detail. Her skin seemed to glow with the same gentle radiance as the bamboo that had sheltered her. And when she opened her dark eyes and looked up at him, Okina felt his heart fill with a joy he had never imagined possible. The old man's wife, Ona, was tending their small garden when she saw her husband returning from the forest. But instead of carrying his usual bundle of cut bamboo, he held something precious in his cupped hands. As he drew closer, she could see that his eyes were bright with tears of wonder. "Wife," he called softly, his voice trembling with emotion. "Heaven has sent us the most miraculous gift." When Ona saw the tiny, glowing infant nestled in her husband's palms, she understood immediately that this was no ordinary child. Together they watched in amazement as the baby began to grow before their very eyes, not rapidly or frighteningly, but with the gentle, natural progression of a flower opening to the morning sun. By the time they reached their humble home, the child had grown to the size of a normal newborn. They named her Nayotake no Kaguya Hime, the shining princess of the young bamboo. And in that moment, their quiet house became filled with a warmth and light it had never known. That very day, Okina's fortune began to change in the most remarkable way. When he returned to the bamboo grove to continue his work, he discovered that many of the stalks he cut now contained small nuggets of the purest gold. These were not crude lumps of metal, but beautiful, naturally formed treasures that seemed to have been shaped by divine hands, some like tiny flowers, others like delicate leaves, all gleaming with their own inner fire. The seasons turned with unusual beauty during the months that followed Kaguya's arrival. Spring seemed more vibrant than anyone could remember, with cherry blossoms that lingered longer on the trees and summer rains that fell like scattered pearls. In their mountain home, the old couple watched their miraculous daughter grow with wonder that never faded. Kaguya developed not with the ordinary progression of mortal children, but with a grace and beauty that seemed to transform everything around her. Within just 3 months, she had grown from the tiny infant they had discovered into a young woman of extraordinary loveliness. Her growth was accompanied by an otherworldly elegance that made even the simplest movements appear like a form of dance. Her hair fell in dark cascades that seemed to contain depths like still water under starlight. Her skin retained that subtle luminescence they had first noticed, as if she were lit from within by captured moonbeams. When she spoke, her voice carried the musical quality of wind chimes stirred by a gentle breeze, and her laughter was like the sound of clear water flowing over smooth stones. The continuing gifts from the bamboo grove transformed the old couple's humble circumstances into something approaching wealth. But these treasures were unlike any earthly riches. Each golden piece was a work of art in miniature, and some days Okina would find bolts of silk so fine they seemed to be woven from cloud and starlight. The silk shimmered with colors that had no names, shifting from deep ocean blue to silver to the pale green of new bamboo leaves as the light touched it. Despite their growing prosperity, Okina tried to keep news of their miraculous daughter hidden from the outside world. He sensed that Kaguya was meant for something far beyond their simple mountain life, but the thought of sharing her with the world filled him with protective anxiety. In their garden, surrounded by vegetables and mountain flowers, she seemed perfect and complete. Why should the complications of the wider world intrude upon such peace? But beauty of such extraordinary nature cannot long remain hidden. Traders who glimpsed her while conducting business with Okina would return to the capital with tales of a young woman whose loveliness surpassed anything they had ever witnessed. Servants who worked for neighboring households began to whisper about the bamboo cutter's daughter, whose very presence seemed to make flowers bloom more brightly and birds sing more sweetly. Kaguya herself remained unaware of the stir she was causing. She spent her days helping with the household tasks, moving through their home with unconscious grace, finding joy in the simplest activities. When she tended the garden, plants seemed to flourish under her touch. When she prepared meals, the food somehow tasted more delicious. When she sat in the evening mending clothes, the lamplight around her seemed warmer and more golden than ordinary flame. During these peaceful months, Kaguya developed a particular love for the night sky. She would often stand in the garden after sunset, gazing up at the stars with an expression of longing that her adoptive parents couldn't quite understand. The sight of the moon, especially when it was full, would bring tears to her eyes, though when they asked her why she wept, she could only say that the lunar light filled her with a sadness she couldn't explain. As word of her beauty spread beyond their mountain village and reached the ears of nobles in the capital, Okina began to receive visits from messengers and matchmakers. Each brought increasingly elaborate proposals from men of higher and higher station, all seeking the hand of the mysterious maiden whose reputation had begun to eclipse even the celebrated beauties of the imperial court. The old bamboo cutter found himself torn between pride and apprehension. Here was validation that his beloved daughter was indeed as extraordinary as he had always believed, but the attention of such powerful men also threatened the peaceful life they had built together. Still, he could not ignore the fact that the treasures from the bamboo grove seemed to be preparing them for exactly this situation, as if heaven itself intended for Kaguya to take her place among the highest ranks of society. Finally, the day came when the pressure became too great to resist. 5 of the most distinguished nobles in all of Japan had sent formal proposals, and their combined influence was such that even a bamboo cutter blessed with mysterious fortune could not simply ignore their requests. With heavy hearts, Okina and Ona realized that their quiet life with their miraculous daughter was about to change forever. The 5 men who sought Princess Kaguya's hand were not ordinary nobles, but individuals whose very names commanded respect throughout the realm. Each possessed wealth that could move mountains, influence that shaped the course of kingdoms, and accomplishments that had earned them places in the highest circles of power. Prince Ishitsukuri was renowned for his vast estates and his collection of rare treasures gathered from across the known world. His palaces were said to contain wonders from distant lands, and his knowledge of precious things was legendary throughout the capital. Prince Kuramochi commanded great armies and controlled important trade routes that brought exotic goods from far beyond Japan's shores. His influence extended across the seas, and merchants would undertake perilous voyages on his behalf to secure items of unusual value. The Minister of the Right, Abe Nomushi, served as one of the emperor's closest advisors, his counsel helping to shape the policies that governed the entire realm. His wisdom in matters of state was matched only by his appreciation for beauty and culture. The Grand Counselor, Otomo no Miyuki, managed the imperial treasury itself, overseeing the vast wealth that supported the imperial court and its countless ceremonies and celebrations. His understanding of value and rarity was unparalleled in the capital. The middle counselor Isonokami no Marotari was celebrated for his learning and his influence over matters of law and literature. Scholars and poets alike sought his patronage, and his library contained texts so rare that some existed nowhere else in the world. When these 5 distinguished men had finally persuaded Okina to arrange a meeting, Kaguya received the news with characteristic composure. Dressed in robes created from the magical silk the bamboo grove had provided, she appeared before them like a vision from the realm of legends. The very air around her seemed to shimmer with otherworldly beauty, and each of the nobles felt his heart captured by her ethereal presence. But when they expressed their desires to wed her, speaking eloquently of the honors and luxuries they could provide, Kaguya listened with polite attention, but showed no sign of favor toward any of them. Her responses were gracious, but revealed no preference, no hint of romantic interest that might guide their hopes. "My lords," she said finally, her voice carrying like music through the chamber where they had gathered, "you honor me far beyond my deserving with your proposals. Each of you represents the pinnacle of achievement and nobility in our realm. But if I must choose among such distinguished suitors, I propose that you demonstrate your worthiness through deeds rather than words." The nobles, confident in their wealth and influence, eagerly agreed to whatever test she might devise. What challenge could be beyond the reach of men who commanded armies and treasuries? Kaguya's requests, when she announced them, were unlike anything they had expected. These were not tasks that could be accomplished through political maneuvering or the deployment of vast resources. but quests for objects so rare and legendary that their very existence was a matter of debate among scholars and sages. To Prince Ishitsukuri, she assigned the task of obtaining the stone begging bowl of the Buddha himself, not any sacred vessel, but the actual bowl used by the Enlightened One during his lifetime on Earth. This bowl, according to legend, would possess a holy radiance that would be unmistakable to anyone who looked upon it. Prince Kuramochi was challenged to bring her a jeweled branch from the mythical island of Harai, where it was said that trees bore fruit of precious stones, and time itself flowed differently than in the mortal world. Such a branch would glow with supernatural beauty and possess properties beyond earthly understanding. The minister Abi no Miyushi must procure a robe made from the fur of fire rats, legendary creatures said to live in the heart of volcanoes, whose pelts could not be consumed by any flame. Such a garment would be proof against any fire, and would retain its beauty no matter what trials it endured. Grand Counselor Otomo no Miyuki was tasked with obtaining a colored jewel from the neck of a dragon, one of those ancient beings said to dwell in the deepest parts of the ocean, in palaces of coral and pearl far beneath the waves. The jewel would contain the essence of oceanic power and wisdom. Finally, Middle Counselor Isunokami no Marutari must bring her a cowrie shell born from a swallow's nest, not an ordinary shell, but one created through the mystical union of sea and sky, earth and air, that only the most spiritually significant of birds could produce. The nobles accepted these challenges with varying degrees of confidence, each believing that his resources and determination would allow him to succeed where others might fail. They departed from the capital with great fanfare, each accompanied by retinues of servants and experts who might assist them in their impossible quests. As the months passed and her suitors traveled to distant lands in pursuit of their assigned treasures, Kaguya found herself able to enjoy a period of relative peace. The elaborate courtship rituals ceased, the constant stream of gifts and messages ended, and she could return to the simpler pleasures that had always brought her joy. She spent long hours in the garden behind the house, tending flowers that seemed to bloom more beautifully under her care. The mountain air was clean and sweet, carrying the scent of pine and wild blossoms that reminded her of her earliest memories in this world. Sometimes she would sit in the shade of an ancient cherry tree and watch clouds drift across the sky, feeling a contentment that had nothing to do with wealth or status. During these quiet months, she began to experience strange dreams, visions of a realm beyond the clouds where beings of light moved through crystal palaces. In these dreams, she was not Princess Kaguya of the Bamboo Grove, but someone else entirely, someone whose true home lay far from the earth. She would wake from these dreams with tears on her cheeks and a longing in her heart that she could not name or understand. As autumn returned to the mountain village, bringing with it the melancholy beauty of falling leaves and harvested fields, the first of Kaguya's suitors returned from his impossible quest. Prince Ishitsukuri arrived with great ceremony, his procession announced by the sound of bells and the sight of banners fluttering in the crisp mountain air. The treasure he presented was contained within an ornate lacquered box, wrapped in silk so fine it seemed to capture and hold the golden light of the autumn afternoon. When the box was opened, it revealed what appeared to be an ancient ceramic bowl, its surface darkened with age and wear, its form simple and humble as befitted a vessel that might have been used by the Buddha himself. Prince Ishitsukuri spoke eloquently of his long journey to distant temples hidden in mountain valleys, of his negotiations with wise monks who had guarded this precious relic for generations. His tale was convincing, filled with details that suggested extensive travel and genuine effort to complete his assigned task. But as Kaguya examined the bowl more closely, turning it gently in her hands and studying its surface in the changing light, she felt a deep certainty settling in her heart. This was not the vessel she had envisioned when she set the task. The true bowl of the Buddha would possess an unmistakable spiritual radiance, a light that came not from any earthly source, but from the enlightened compassion it had once served. "This is indeed an ancient and venerable bowl," she said with gentle courtesy, her voice carrying no accusation or harshness. But the stone begging bowl of the Buddha would shine with holy light, a radiance born of perfect wisdom and infinite compassion. This vessel, though sacred in its own way, does not possess that divine illumination. The words fell like autumn leaves in the sudden silence that followed. Prince Ishitsukuri's face flushed with a mixture of anger and shame, as his deception was exposed with such quiet certainty. He had indeed purchased the bowl from a dealer in religious antiquities, trusting that its age and provenance would be sufficient to satisfy the princess's requirements. He had not expected such spiritual discernment from one so young and seemingly sheltered. With wounded pride masking his embarrassment, Prince Ishitsukuri gathered his retinue and departed, never to trouble the household again. His failure became the subject of whispered conversations throughout the capital, a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating the mysterious princess of the bamboo grove. Several weeks later, as the first snow began to dust the mountain peaks, Prince Kuramochi returned with an object of such breathtaking beauty that even the household servants gasped when they saw it. The jeweled branch he presented appeared to be carved from the finest jade, its leaves crafted from emeralds and sapphires that caught the winter light like captured fragments of sky and sea. Crystalline fruits hung from its delicate twigs, each one appearing to contain its own inner fire, and the craftsmanship was so exquisite that it seemed entirely possible such a thing might have grown on trees in some supernatural realm. Prince Kuramochi's tale of his quest was even more elaborate than his predecessors, a story of dangerous sea voyages through perpetual mists, of mysterious islands that appeared and disappeared like mirages, of bargains struck with otherworldly beings who demanded payment in years of life rather than gold. Kaguya held the branch with reverence, admiring its undeniable beauty, while searching her heart for the truth that seemed to elude even her careful examination. The craftsmanship was indeed masterful, the materials costly beyond measure, and yet something indefinable was missing, some essential quality that would mark it as truly supernatural rather than merely magnificent. Before she could voice her doubts, however, an unexpected commotion at the mansion's gates resolved the matter for her. A group of craftsmen had arrived, their faces flushed with anger and their voices raised in demands for justice. They had labored for months, they declared, to create the jeweled branch according to Prince Kuramochi's precise specifications, using the finest materials and their most skilled techniques. They had been promised payment upon completion of their masterwork, but the prince had taken their creation and vanished without settling his debt. Now they had tracked him here, demanding either the return of their work or the compensation they had been promised. The beautiful branch was revealed as exactly what Kaguya had suspected, a masterwork of human artistry, but mortal nonetheless. Prince Kuramochi, his elaborate deception exposed in the most humiliating manner possible, fled the capital that very night, leaving behind only unpaid debts and a reputation in ruins. The winter deepened, blanketing the mountain village in pristine snow that made the world seem hushed and sacred. In this season of quiet contemplation, the minister Abe no Mushi returned from his quest, bearing what appeared to be the impossible treasure Kaguya had demanded. The robe he presented seemed to be woven from fur, unlike anything found in the natural world. It shimmered with its own inner heat, and even in the cold winter air, merely touching it was like placing one's hand near a warming fire. The minister's tale of distant lands beyond the sea, of Chinese merchants who had sold him this legendary garment at enormous cost, was told with the conviction of a man who had indeed traveled far and risked much. Kaguya examined the strange robe with careful attention, feeling its unusual warmth and marveling at its extraordinary texture. According to the legends she had heard, true fire rat fur would possess one unmistakable property. It would be completely immune to flame of any kind, unable to burn no matter how intense the heat applied to it. "This is indeed a remarkable garment," she said thoughtfully, her fingers tracing the unusual patterns in the fur. "But if it is truly made from fire rat hide, it should be able to withstand any flame without damage. Perhaps we might test this quality to be certain of its authenticity." Minister Abe no Miyushi agreed to the test, though his confidence seemed to waver as servants brought forward a large candle with a steady, bright flame. The moment the robe was brought near the fire, it began to smolder and burn like any ordinary fabric, filling the air with the acrid smell of singed fur and dashed hopes. The minister, his false treasure reduced to smoking ruins, departed in shame without another word. His political career would never fully recover from the humiliation of being exposed in such a public deception. Spring returned to the mountains with unusual splendor, as if nature itself wanted to provide beauty to compensate for the disappointments that had marked the winter months. Cherry blossoms bloomed in cascades of pink and white, their petals falling like gentle snow on the warming earth, and the mountain streams ran clear and musical with snowmelt from the peaks. It was in this season of renewal that Grand Counselor Otomo no Miyuki returned from his quest. But unlike the previous suitors, he arrived not in triumph, but in obvious distress. His clothes were salt-stained and weathered by long exposure to sea winds. His face was gaunt from privation, and his eyes held the haunted look of a man who had faced forces beyond human comprehension. When he was brought before Princess Kaguya, he carried no treasure, no prize to present as evidence of his success. Instead, he told a tale that was all the more compelling for its honesty about failure and the terrible costs of his attempt. He had indeed sought the dragons of legend, he explained, commissioning ships and hiring the most experienced sea captains available. For months, his expedition had searched the deepest parts of the ocean, following ancient maps and local legends that spoke of underwater palaces where the great serpents dwelt. They had found dragons, he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper as he recalled the encounter. But the creatures were more terrible and magnificent than any legend had suggested, beings of such awesome power that his ships had been scattered like leaves in a storm, his men lost to the depths, and he himself barely escaping with his life. "Princess," he said, bowing deeply before her, "I return empty-handed and humbled. I found the dragons you spoke of, but I learned that some treasures are guarded by powers beyond mortal reach. I offer you only the truth of my failure and my deep respect for the wisdom that set me on this impossible task." Of all the suitors who had sought her hand, this was the first who had not attempted deception, the first who had returned with honest acknowledgement of defeat rather than elaborate fabrications. Kaguya received his account with compassion, recognizing in his humbled demeanor a man who had faced reality and found himself wanting, yet retained enough honor to speak truthfully about his failure. Though she could not grant him what he sought, for her heart remained unmoved by romantic feeling toward any of her earthly suitors, she respected his honesty and treated him with kindness as he departed to rebuild his shattered life. The last of the 5 suitors returned as summer deepened into its most glorious phase, when the mountain air was warm and sweet, and the gardens surrounding the house bloomed with flowers of every imaginable color. Middle Counselor Isonokami no Marotari arrived with great fanfare, claiming to bear the most impossible treasure of all. The cowrie shell he presented appeared ordinary at first glance, but when opened, it revealed within its pearlescent interior a perfect pearl that seemed to capture and hold moonlight even in broad daylight. His story was the most elaborate yet, a tale of patient observation of swallow colonies, of climbing to impossible heights to reach nests built on cliff faces that touched the very clouds, and of the miraculous discovery of this shell within a nest constructed by birds whose understanding transcended that of ordinary creatures. The pearl within the shell was indeed beautiful beyond description, seeming to pulse with its own inner radiance like a fragment of captured starlight. For a moment, even Kaguya felt genuine wonder at the sight of such beauty emerging from such a humble source. But as Marotari told his tale of impossible climbs and mystical discoveries, she began to notice inconsistencies in his account. Small details that didn't align with her knowledge of swallows and their nesting habits. The very elaborateness of his story began to work against him, suggesting the kind of careful construction that often masks deception. Her suspicions were confirmed in the most dramatic way possible when, during his presentation, a swallow suddenly flew in through an open window. The bird was in a state of obvious agitation, flying directly toward Marotari with aggressive intent that suggested personal grievance rather than random animal behavior. As the bird attacked the startled nobleman, servants managed to capture it long enough to discover a small pouch tied to its leg. Within this pouch was a message from Marotari's own servants, confessing under pressure that their master had indeed robbed a swallow's nest, but not in the mystical manner he claimed. He had simply stolen the ordinary contents of a common nest and commissioned skilled jewelers to create the false pearl that now gleamed so beautifully in the morning light. Like his predecessors, the middle counselor departed in shame, his deception exposed in a manner that would make him a figure of ridicule throughout the capital for years to come. The 5 impossible tasks had indeed proven impossible, but not in the way the suitors had expected. They had been defeated not by the rarity of the treasures, but by their own willingness to substitute deception for genuine accomplishment. With the departure of the last suitor, a strange peace settled over the mountain house. For the first time in over a year, Kaguya could walk in her garden without the weight of unwanted attention, could sit by her window in the evening without wondering what elaborate gift or proposal might arrive with the next morning's light. But this peace, though welcome, was tinged with a growing melancholy that her adoptive parents could not understand. As the autumn moon festival approached, Kaguya began to spend more and more time gazing up at the night sky, and her eyes would fill with tears whenever the moon was full, though she could not explain the source of her sorrow. Word of Princess Kaguya's extraordinary wisdom in dealing with her impossible suitors had spread throughout the capital and beyond. The tale of how she had exposed each elaborate deception through her supernatural discernment became the subject of countless conversations, sung by traveling minstrels and recorded by court chroniclers as an example of heavenly wisdom manifesting in earthly form. But among all those who heard these stories, none was more intrigued than the Emperor of Japan himself. Here was a woman who had proven herself superior in judgment to 5 of the most powerful nobles in his realm, who possessed beauty that inspired legends and wisdom that seemed to transcend human understanding. His curiosity, once aroused, could not be satisfied by second-hand accounts and rumored descriptions. Unlike the crude approaches of the 5 failed suitors, the Emperor's initial contact with Princess Kaguya was accomplished with the utmost delicacy and respect. He sent not demands or presumptuous proposals, but a simple invitation. Would the renowned princess honor the imperial court with her presence, so that he might have the privilege of meeting this remarkable woman whose reputation had reached even to the heights of his exalted position? The invitation itself was a work of art, written on paper so fine it seemed to have been made from captured moonbeams, with calligraphy that flowed like water and words that demonstrated both imperial authority and genuine humility. This was not a command disguised as a request, but a sincere desire to meet someone whose qualities had earned his deep respect even before they encountered each other. When Kaguya received this invitation, she felt a stirring of interest unlike anything the previous suitors had inspired. Here was someone who approached her not as a prize to be won or a treasure to be acquired, but as a person whose thoughts and feelings might actually matter. The very courtesy of his approach suggested a mind capable of seeing beyond surface beauty to the individual beneath. The visit to the imperial palace was arranged with ceremony befitting both her reputation and his position, but without the ostentatious display that had marked the 5 nobles' courtships. Kaguya was dressed in the finest of her celestial robes, garments that seemed to have been woven from starlight and morning mist, colors that shifted and changed like aurora dancing across the northern sky. The imperial palace was magnificent beyond anything she had ever imagined. Gardens that stretched to the horizon like carefully arranged paradises, buildings that seemed to float above perfectly placed pools and streams like visions from the realm of dreams. Yet even surrounded by such earthly splendor, Kaguya moved with the otherworldly grace that marked her as something beyond ordinary human beauty. The Emperor, when she was finally brought before him in a pavilion overlooking his most beautiful garden, proved to be unlike any man she had previously encountered. Where the 5 suitors had looked upon her with obvious desire and calculation, the Emperor's gaze held genuine curiosity and respect. His eyes seemed to see her not as an object of desire, but as a fellow being whose inner nature might be as interesting as her outward appearance. Their first conversation was conducted with the elaborate courtesy required by imperial protocol. But beneath the formal language, Kaguya sensed something different from her previous encounters with powerful men. The Emperor spoke to her not as a subject to be commanded or a prize to be claimed, but as an equal whose opinions and preferences were genuinely important to him. "Princess Kaguya," he said, his voice carrying the natural authority of absolute power, but tempered with unmistakable kindness. "Your reputation for wisdom and discernment has impressed even those of us who thought we understood the limits of earthly excellence. But I find myself curious not about your supernatural qualities, but about the person who possesses them. What brings you joy? What captures your interest? What do you think about when you believe no one is watching?" These questions, so different from the flowery compliments and presumptuous proposals she had grown accustomed to, caught Kaguya by surprise. For the first time since her transformation into a celebrated princess, someone was asking about her inner life rather than simply praising her external qualities. Over the following weeks and months, the emperor invited Kaguya to return to the palace several times. Sometimes these visits were formal occasions, where she was presented to the court and expected to demonstrate her accomplishments in music, poetry, and conversation. But increasingly, the emperor arranged for more intimate meetings where they could speak together in his private gardens or in small pavilions where the noise of court life could not intrude. During these quieter encounters, Kaguya began to see past the imperial dignity to the man beneath. The emperor was lonely, she realized, surrounded by people who told him only what they thought he wanted to hear, responsible for the welfare of an entire nation, but with few people he could trust with his genuine thoughts and concerns. She found herself actually enjoying their conversations in a way that surprised her. The emperor was intelligent and well-educated, with a genuine interest in art, literature, and the natural world. He asked her opinion on matters of aesthetics and philosophy, listened carefully to her responses, and seemed to value her mind as much as her legendary beauty. For his part, the emperor discovered in Kaguya qualities that he had despaired of ever finding in another person. Here was someone who could discuss the classics with genuine understanding, who could appreciate the subtle beauty of a perfectly arranged flower display, who could compose poetry that moved the heart rather than simply demonstrating technical skill. More importantly, she possessed a kind of innocence and authenticity that seemed impossible in the sophisticated corruption of court life. As the seasons turned and their acquaintance deepened into something approaching friendship, the emperor found himself looking forward to Kaguya's visits more than any other aspect of his imperial duties. In her presence, he felt like his truest self, rather than the formal figure he was required to present to the world. When he finally spoke of marriage, it was not with the presumption of his predecessors, or the assumption that his imperial status made acceptance inevitable. Instead, he approached the subject with the same careful respect he had shown throughout their relationship. "Princess Kaguya," he said one evening as they walked together through gardens where early plum blossoms were beginning to bloom despite the winter cold. "I have come to value our friendship more than any other aspect of my life. You have shown me that it is possible to find someone who sees beyond imperial dignity to the person beneath. Would you consider sharing not just my palace and my position, but my actual life, with all its burdens as well as its privileges?" Kaguya felt her heart respond to his words in a way that none of the previous proposals had inspired. Of all the men who had sought her hand, the emperor was the only one she could imagine caring for, the only one who had bothered to know her as an individual, rather than simply desiring her as a symbol of supernatural beauty. Yet even as she recognized his genuine worth and her own growing affection for him, she felt the same strange detachment that had marked her response to all earthly attachments. There was something within her nature that seemed to observe rather than fully participate in these human emotions, as if she were watching her own life from a great distance. "Your Majesty honors me beyond measure," she replied, choosing her words with careful honesty. "Of all those who have sought my hand, you alone have offered not just wealth or status, but genuine companionship and respect. Yet I fear there are aspects of my nature that would make me unsuitable as an empress. I am not as other women, and I sense that forces beyond my understanding may not permit me to remain in this earthly realm indefinitely." In the 3rd year since the failed Suitors' departures, as Princess Kaguya's relationship with the emperor had grown into something approaching love, at least as close to that emotion as her otherworldly nature seemed to permit, a change began to manifest itself that filled everyone who cared for her with growing concern. It started subtly, with an increasing tendency toward melancholy that seemed to deepen with each passing month. Where Kaguya had once found joy in simple pleasures, the arrangement of flowers, the composition of poetry, walks in mountain gardens, she now moved through these activities with a distant quality, as if her attention were divided between the earthly realm and some other, invisible world. Most troubling was her response to the full moon. Each month, as the lunar orb reached its perfect roundness and bathed the world in silver radiance, Kaguya would become nearly inconsolable. She would stand in the garden for hours, gazing up at the moon with tears streaming down her face, her expression one of longing so intense it seemed to encompass her entire being. When her adoptive parents or the emperor asked about these mysterious episodes of grief, she could only say that the sight of the full moon filled her with a homesickness for a place she couldn't remember, a yearning for something she had lost but couldn't name. The very light of the moon seemed to call to something deep within her nature, awakening memories that remained frustratingly just beyond the reach of conscious thought. The emperor, watching the woman he had come to love struggle with this inexplicable sorrow, tried every means at his disposal to bring her comfort. He commissioned the finest musicians to play for her, brought the most celebrated poets to compose verses in her honor, and arranged for her to visit the most beautiful locations in his realm. But nothing seemed able to penetrate the growing distance in her eyes or ease the supernatural melancholy that was slowly consuming her. Even more disturbing were the physical changes that began to manifest during this period. Kaguya had always possessed an otherworldly beauty, but now she began to take on qualities that seemed less human with each passing day. Her skin developed an almost translucent quality, as if she were becoming a being of light rather than flesh. When she moved, particularly during the full moon periods, she seemed to cast no shadow, and her footsteps made no sound even on hard surfaces. The servants in both the mountain house and the imperial palace began to whisper about supernatural visitations and ghostly manifestations. Plants would bloom out of season when she passed by, and the night air would sometimes carry music that seemed to have no earthly source. More than once, guards reported seeing her walking in gardens where investigation revealed no footprints, as if she had been floating just above the ground. Okina and Ona, watching their beloved daughter undergo this mysterious transformation, finally began to understand that their worst fears might be justified. The child they had found in the glowing bamboo stalk, whom they had raised and loved as their own, might not be destined to remain with them forever. During the summer of that third year, as the heat grew oppressive and the cicadas filled the mountain air with their constant singing, Kaguya's condition reached a crisis point. She began to refuse most food, claiming that earthly sustenance no longer appealed to her. She would spend entire nights standing in the moonlight, and sometimes the household would hear her speaking in a language none of them recognized, words that flowed like music but contained meanings beyond human understanding. Most alarming of all, on nights when the moon was brightest, she would begin to glow with her own inner radiance, becoming so luminous that looking directly at her became difficult. During these episodes, she seemed more spirit than human, beautiful beyond earthly comprehension, but distant in a way that filled all who loved her with dread. Finally, unable to bear the mystery and worry any longer, her parents and the emperor confronted her directly, demanding to know what was happening to her and whether there was anything they could do to help. The conversation took place in her secret garden, where wild mountain flowers bloomed in impossible colors under the influence of her supernatural presence. It was there, with tears falling like silver in the moonlight, that Kaguya finally revealed the truth that had been growing within her understanding like a slow dawn. She was beginning to remember who she truly was and where she had come from before her earthly life began. "I am not of this world," she said, her voice carrying a resonance that seemed to echo from vast distances. "I was sent here from the moon as punishment for some transgression I committed in my celestial form. My time of exile is drawing to an end, and soon I will be called to return to my true home in the capital of the moon." She explained that the gold Okina had found in the bamboo stalks was not a magical gift, but a stipend sent from her celestial realm to pay for her earthly upkeep during her exile. The approaching end of that exile was what caused her increasing detachment from earthly concerns and her growing resonance with lunar influences. "I have learned to love this world and all of you who have shown me kindness," she continued, her voice breaking with genuine sorrow. "But I fear that love itself may not be enough to overcome the celestial forces that originally brought me here. With each full moon, I feel the pull of my true nature more strongly, and I know that soon I will not be able to resist the call to return home." As autumn approached and the time of the harvest moon drew near, Princess Kaguya's supernatural transformation accelerated beyond anything her earthly family had yet witnessed. She became increasingly ethereal with each passing day, so translucent that she seemed more like a reflection on water than a solid being. Her voice took on otherworldly harmonies that made even simple conversation feel like communication with a celestial spirit. The Emperor, desperate to prevent the loss of the woman he had grown to love, stationed his finest guards around the mountain house where Kaguya had returned to spend what everyone feared might be her final days on Earth. These were not ordinary soldiers, but the most elite warriors in his service, men whose courage and skill had been tested in countless battles. Yet even as these preparations were made, all who knew Kaguya understood that mortal weapons and human determination would likely prove useless against the celestial forces she had described. The very air around the house seemed charged with supernatural energy, and strange lights could be seen dancing among the bamboo groves when the moon was bright. On the night before the autumn full moon, the most spiritually significant lunar event of the year, Kaguya spent her final earthly hours saying farewell to the life and people she had come to cherish. She moved through the house and garden like a graceful ghost, touching familiar objects and visiting favorite places as if committing them to an eternal memory. With Okina and Ona, she shared the most painful of partings. These two simple people, who had loved her unconditionally since the moment they found her, who had sacrificed their quiet mountain life to give her what they believed she deserved, now faced the ultimate proof that she had never truly belonged to their world. "My dear parents," she said, embracing them with arms that seemed to contain no more substance than moonbeams, "you have given me the greatest gifts possible, the knowledge of what love means, and the understanding of what it costs to care for another being completely. In whatever realm I return to, I will carry these lessons like treasured jewels." To the Emperor, she offered words that contained all the affection she was capable of feeling for an earthly being. "You showed me that power at its finest is not about domination, but about service. That true nobility lies not in commanding others, but in caring for their welfare. I have been honored by your friendship and moved by your kindness in ways that will remain with me beyond the boundaries of worlds." As the full moon rose above the eastern mountains, shining with unusual brilliance that seemed to transform the entire landscape into something from the realm of dreams, a new light appeared in the western sky. At first, it resembled a second moon, but as it drew closer, its true nature became apparent. Descending from the heavens came a procession of celestial beings that defied earthly description. They moved through the night air as easily as mortals walked upon land, their forms shimmering with radiance that made the moon itself seem dim by comparison. Some appeared to ride upon clouds that glowed like pearls, while others traveled within vehicles that seemed to be constructed from crystallized starlight. The guards the emperor had stationed around the house stood frozen, their weapons lowering without conscious command as they gazed upon sights that challenged the very limits of human comprehension. The air itself seemed to vibrate with music, too complex and beautiful for earthly ears to fully process, creating harmonies that were felt more than heard. At the head of this magnificent embassy was a figure of such authority and ethereal beauty that even Kaguya, despite her supernatural nature, felt compelled to bow in recognition. This celestial ambassador wore robes that seemed to be cut from the fabric of space itself, adorned with patterns that resembled distant galaxies and cosmic phenomena beyond earthly understanding. When this being spoke, his voice carried the resonance of solar winds across vast distances, yet his words were gentle and filled with compassion for the earthbound creatures before him. "Princess Kaguya," he said, and hearing her name spoken in that otherworldly voice seemed to complete the awakening of memories that had been stirring within her for months. "Your period of exile has ended. You have experienced earthly life as was required, learned the lessons of material attachment and mortal emotion. Now you must return to your true home and resume your place among the eternal ones." As the celestial ambassador spoke, Kaguya felt herself being drawn toward the heavenly embassy, not by any external force, but by recognition deep within her being. Memories were flooding back now, recollections of a realm where beauty existed in forms that earthly eyes could never perceive, where music formed the fundamental language of existence, and where beings of pure light moved through crystal palaces under skies of eternal starlight. She remembered now the nature of her original transgression, not a crime of malice or cruelty, but a failure to understand the beauty and value of mortal existence. In her celestial arrogance, she had dismissed the brief, passionate lives of earthly beings as insignificant compared to the eternal peace of her heavenly realm. As both punishment and education, she'd been sentenced to live as a human, to experience the joys and sorrows of finite existence, to learn what it meant to love knowing that love could be lost. The lesson had been learned, perhaps too thoroughly. The connections she had formed on Earth, with her humble adoptive parents, with the emperor who had seen her true heart, with the simple beauties of mountain flowers and human kindness, had become so precious that the thought of leaving felt like a form of spiritual death. "I understand my duty and accept my fate," she said, her voice carrying across the garden with crystalline clarity. "But I beg permission to complete my earthly farewells and leave tokens of remembrance with those who have loved me despite my celestial nature." The celestial ambassador, displaying the infinite patience that characterized beings for whom time held no urgency, graciously granted Kaguya's final request. As she prepared for her return to the moon, she moved among her earthly family with deliberate care, knowing that each gesture must serve as a permanent farewell. She began with the simple gifts that would provide comfort in her absence. To Okina and Ona, she gave her own earthly robe, not one of the magnificent garments created from celestial silk, but the simple white kimono she had worn during their quiet morning conversations. "When you touch this," she told them, her voice thick with the tears that would soon be impossible for her celestial nature to shed, "remember that every moment of love you gave me has been treasured beyond measure. In whatever realm awaits me, some part of my being will always carry the warmth of your affection." To the emperor, she offered the most profound gift at her disposal, a small vial containing liquid that seemed to capture the essence of starlight itself. "This is the elixir of immortality," she explained, placing it gently in his hands along with a letter sealed with wax that glowed like captured moonbeams. "With this, you could live forever, could reign over your people for countless ages, but I give it to you, not as something you must use, but as a choice you must make." The emperor understood immediately the weight of what she was offering, the chance to live eternally with memories of their love, or to remain mortal and allow those memories to eventually fade with his natural lifespan. It was a choice between eternal longing and eventual peace. "The letter contains my thoughts on what choice I hope you will make," Kaguya continued, "but the decision must be yours alone. I have learned during my earthly exile that sometimes the most beautiful things are precious precisely because they cannot last forever." As she completed these final acts of love and remembrance, the celestial beings began to arrange themselves for her ascension. The air around them shimmered with otherworldly energy, and music that seemed to emanate from the space between stars filled the night with harmonies that made earthly hearts ache with inexplicable longing. The celestial ambassador approached, bearing in his luminous hands the hagoromo, the feather robe that would complete Kaguya's transformation back to her true celestial nature. The garment appeared to be woven from captured auroras and crystallized music, its surface shifting through colors that had no names in any human language. "This sacred robe," the ambassador explained, his voice resonating with cosmic authority, "will restore your true nature completely. Once it touches your shoulders, the weight of earthly emotions will lift from you, and you will remember fully who you were before your exile began." Kaguya looked upon the beautiful garment with emotions too complex for her transforming nature to fully process. She could feel its power from where she stood, could sense how it would strip away not just her physical mortality, but all the attachments and feelings that had made her earthly life so precious and painful. This was both the promise of peace and a kind of spiritual death. To wear the hagoromo would end her suffering at the thought of leaving her earthly family, but it would also end the capacity for the deep, personal love that had made that suffering meaningful. "Will any part of who I have become remain?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "You will be your truest self," came the reply. "The self that exists beyond the temporary illusions of mortal attachment. The pain you feel now at leaving these earthly connections is itself a shadow, cast by dwelling too long in the realm of impermanence." As the robe was lifted toward her shoulders, Kaguya looked one final time at the faces of those who had comprised her earthly family. Okina and Ona stood holding each other in their shared grief, their weathered faces wet with tears but filled with love so pure it seemed to rival the radiance of the celestial beings themselves. The emperor maintained his dignity, even as his eyes held all the pain of a heart that had learned to love only to face immediate loss. The sight of their sorrow nearly broke her resolve to accept her celestial destiny. Here was love given freely and without expectation of return, affection that asked nothing but offered everything, connections forged not from desire for gain, but from simple recognition of shared humanity. "I want them to know," she said to the celestial ambassador, her voice carrying new strength born of final understanding, "that loving them has not been a weakness or a distraction from my true nature. It has been the completion of my education. Whatever I was before I came to Earth, I am more complete now, for having learned what it means to love mortals." With this declaration, she allowed the Hagoromo to settle upon her shoulders. The transformation began immediately and was both beautiful and terrible to witness. Her earthly form dissolved like morning mist, replaced by something that belonged more to legend than to memory. The elaborate court dress she wore was replaced by flowing garments that seemed to be cut from the aurora itself, and her carefully painted human features refined themselves into something too perfect for mortal eyes to look upon comfortably. But most significant was what happened to her emotional connection to the earthly realm. The sharp pain of parting began to fade, replaced by a serene detachment that removed the sting from grief while somehow preserving the essential memory of love. She could still see the beauty in her earthly family's faces, could still recognize the preciousness of what they had shared, but the desperate attachment that had made farewell so difficult was gently lifted from her heart. As her celestial nature fully reasserted itself, Kaguya began to rise from the earth without any conscious effort. Her feet left the ground as naturally as light rises toward its source, and she found herself ascending toward the waiting embassy of celestial beings. From her increasing height, she looked down upon the world that had been her temporary home. The mountain house where she had learned to love, the gardens where she had discovered the beauty of impermanent things, the palace where she had known friendship with one who valued her mind as well as her beauty. All of it seemed small and distant now, but touched with a beauty that she somehow knew she would carry with her into eternity. The lesson of her exile was complete. She had learned not just what it meant to be mortal, but what it meant to love mortals. And that knowledge, refined and purified by her celestial transformation, would remain part of her essential nature forever. As the Embassy of Light began its journey back to the moon, carrying the transformed princess toward her true home among the Eternal Ones, those left behind on Earth stood in the garden watching until the last glimmer of celestial radiance disappeared into the star-filled sky. In the days and years that followed Princess Kaguya's return to her celestial realm, those who had known and loved her found ways to honor the memory of their time together, each according to their nature and understanding. Okina and Ona, their hearts both broken and somehow enlarged by the experience of loving someone so completely, returned to their simple mountain life. But they brought with them a peace that had not existed before their extraordinary daughter entered their lives. The gold from the bamboo grove had made them wealthy beyond their needs, but more importantly, the experience of loving Kaguya had made them rich in ways that had nothing to do with material prosperity. In their mountain cottage, they tended a garden where Kaguya's favorite flowers continued to bloom with unusual beauty, as if her influence lingered in the very soil she had touched. Travelers who passed by would sometimes report seeing lights moving among the blossoms on clear nights, and hearing laughter carried on the mountain wind that reminded them of silver bells or water flowing over stones. The old couple lived simply but peacefully, their days filled with quiet contentment and their hearts sustained by memories that seemed to grow more precious rather than more painful with the passage of time. When visitors asked about the celestial princess who had once lived among them, they would speak not of her supernatural beauty or her impossible wisdom, but of smaller things. How she had delighted in watching butterflies in their garden, how her presence had made ordinary meals taste like feasts, how she had brought light and laughter to their humble home. The emperor faced a choice that would define the remainder of his reign and his life. In the letter Kaguya had left him, written in script that seemed to capture starlight on paper, she had shared her thoughts about the gift of mortality and the beauty that comes from accepting the natural cycles of life and death. "The cherry blossoms are not beloved despite their brief flowering," she had written, "but because of it. Their beauty gains meaning from their transience, just as our love gained preciousness from knowing it could not last forever. To preserve something unchanging for eternity is to rob it of the very quality that made it sacred." For many months, the emperor kept the vial of immortality elixir close to him, sometimes taking it out to study the liquid that seemed to contain captured starlight. The promise it offered was tempting. Endless years in which to remember their time together, eternal life in which her memory could remain forever fresh and immediate. But gradually, as he read and reread her letter, he began to understand what choice she hoped he would make. On the anniversary of her departure, he climbed the great mountain of Suruga province, that peak which reached toward the heavens like a bridge between earth and sky. There, as the full moon cast silver light across the summit, he built a small fire using wood he had brought from the garden where they had walked together. Into this fire he placed both the vial of immortality and the precious letter, watching as the flames transformed these earthly treasures into smoke that rose toward the star-filled sky. As the smoke ascended, the emperor felt a peace he had not known since childhood settle into his heart. He would live his mortal span, he decided, would rule his people with the wisdom Kaguya had helped him discover, and would eventually join the natural cycle that made all existence precious. In choosing mortality over eternal preservation, he honored both the lesson she had learned during her earthly exile and the love they had shared. The mountain where this ceremony took place was transformed by the emperor's sacrifice and came to be known by a name that honored both the immortality that had been refused and the enduring love that transcended even death itself. Mount Fuji, they called it, and people said that smoke could sometimes be seen rising from its peak even when no fires burned upon its slopes, as if the mountain itself remembered the love that had been offered to the heavens. In the celestial realm, Princess Kaguya had indeed resumed her place among beings of eternal light and beauty. But her earthly sojourn had changed her in ways that surprised even her celestial peers. In council among the immortal ones, she would speak of lessons learned in the realm of impermanence, how beings who knew their time was limited could achieve heights of courage, compassion, and love that even eternal entities might envy. Sometimes, when the moon was full and the night was particularly clear, sensitive souls on Earth would notice an extra radiance in the lunar light, as if the moon itself had been touched by her continued presence in the realm beyond the sky. And in quiet places throughout the land, mountain gardens where simple flowers bloomed with unusual beauty, bamboo groves where the wind carried half-remembered melodies, temple courtyards where moonlight seemed to dance with conscious grace, the story of Princess Kaguya lived on. The tale was told and retold, passed down through generations of storytellers who understood that some stories transcend mere entertainment. Parents would tell it to their children on nights when the moon was bright, and lovers would whisper it to each other under starlit skies, finding in its gentle sadness and ultimate hope a reflection of their own deepest longings. For in the end, Princess Kaguya's greatest gift to the earthly realm was not her supernatural beauty or her celestial wisdom, but her demonstration that love, once given and received, becomes part of the eternal pattern of existence. Like the light of the moon that watches over all sleeping souls, like the turning of the seasons that brings both loss and renewal, like the brief flowering of cherry blossoms that returns each spring more beautiful for having been lost the year before. True love transcends the boundaries between realms and becomes as lasting as the mountains, as constant as the stars, as enduring as the stories we tell ourselves to remember what matters most. And so the story continues, woven into the very fabric of night itself, a lullaby for those who listen to the wind in bamboo groves and watch moonlight dance across still water. For those who know how to listen, it whispers that love given freely and without expectation becomes eternal, that beauty shared with open hearts transcends the mortal realm, and that some gifts are so precious they transform not only those who receive them, but those who give them as well.